Hey, I think I'm live again, and thank you very much for joining me. It's been an exhausting couple of weeks. Every day now, there is so much it seems to be learning. I go and do an interview, you think that you're going to be putting out stuff, and you wind up just imbibing so much new knowledge. Recently, I had this conversation with a women's advocate from Ghana talking about the vulnerability of African married women to domestic violence and so on. And I thought I understood it all, but the whole thing was an absolute learning exercise. Actually, that video, if you're watching this on Rumble, is a couple of steps beneath this one. So just click over there and have a look. But apart from that, do me the favor of liking this video, commenting on it, if you can, share it. If you like what my thesis says, because it enables more people to be fed this kind of information. And I think it's important because there are very few broadcasters out there now with my point of view, kind of talking to people in the open. So my thesis on this video is simple. I'm saying that Africans weren't put here to validate Europeans. And while people may think, ooh, what's that? That sounds a little bit kind of aggressive or off-putting from you, Ted. I will say that the only reason a person would say that is because there is so much background knowledge that they're lacking that they couldn't possibly put this statement that Africans weren't put here to validate Europeans in any kind of context. So let me try and contextualize it for you, first of all. Look, I'm minded, because I come from a media background, to look at people of African origin who appear, say, in the mainstream media. They're the ones who've got the highest traction, the highest number of eyeballs through our communities and so on. And I ask myself what impact they have on the news agenda and the way in which the news is reported. Don't ever blame the person sitting in front of the camera. Behind the person sitting in front of the camera are several levels of editorial decision making. Of course, the person who's presenting the information is going to have some kind of input into it, but essentially the news agenda and the editorial position will be taken at a position way higher. Thus it is that most people of African origin you will see in the Western mainstream media are really just presenters. That's all they are. And if you think that because of their shade of skin or their hairstyle or their style of dress or whatever is a little bit kind of non-traditional, you'd be forgiven for thinking that the media was being incredibly diverse. Usually it's not at all, because these people are being told what to say and how to say it. Secondly, they are not able to inform the news agenda with the spectacular insights. And I know many broadcasters. Actually, they're some of the brightest people I know. They're some of the most able people I know. Certainly here in the United Kingdom. I know less about it in the United States, but I have no reason to think that it would be anywhere different. But in the UK, for certain, if they're on TV, if they're on radio, if they're a minority ethnic, you can bet your bottom dollar that that person has got all their marbles thoroughly in place. And yet they are not able to make an impact on the news agenda. Lots of little things, which you can't blame them for. Most people don't know, for example, that in 1805, when Admiral Horatio Nelson trounced the Franco-Hispanic fleet, smashed it to pieces at the Battle of Trafalgar, that there were lots and lots of black sailors right there in the British Navy. That was in 1805. Coming closer down to the times in which we are now. In the First World War, there were many, many African and Indian forces fighting for the Allies against the then Axis powers on the Western Front. In the Second World War, I can go into even greater detail. There was a battle at Gondar. Gondar is actually one of the names of the barracks of Ghanaian military barracks in Accra, Ghana today. Battle of Gondar was in 1941. It was the last stand of the Italian forces in uh, Italian Eastern Africa, and they were all taken prisoner. Ghanaian forces took part in that. Then there's another place in what they called the Forgotten War. This was Burma in the Second World War. That was 1943. The British campaign at Arakan to take back Burma after the Japanese had invaded and thrown Britain effectively out of Burma. Again, there are other military barracks named for this in Ghana, in Accra, to this day, celebrating the fact that many Ghanaian soldiers took place in those campaigns. And of course, a lot of them lost their lives in horrific circumstances in fighting in the desert. So this stuff is occulted from our educational curricula. I don't blame you for not knowing it. You weren't taught it at school. Why is it occulted from the educational curricula? It's so that a certain narrative of British history can be painted. Why is that narrative of British history being pushed forward? It's so that certain international relationships can be maintained. So when it winds up with the British people not having any knowledge of specific parts of their history, and they come across a headline which says Africans weren't put here to validate Europeans, they'll think, ooh, that's a bit aggressive, that's a little bit insensitive, and so on. No, actually, it's not. Because if you think that your entire history has been created by people who only look like you, well, I think being dismissive is probably to be expected, certainly justifiable to a degree, although in this modern day and age, ignorance of anything is by choice, because on the internet, you can find almost everything that has happened in the history of the world, except the activities of the global elites, which are very carefully scrubbed from the internet. So, so that's not the only thing. Now, it comes to when you have people of African origin or people of minority ethnic origin in positions of high office, recent history has shown that such people have been capable of doing things which, I've got to say this, most of the Europeans that I call my personal friends, I don't think they'd be able to make those decisions. Spectacularly coming to mind is the activities of our Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who has, in the words of Prime Minister Johnson, created a strategic new development in the way in which refugees and migrants are managed in Europe. What's her solution? She bonses an African leader 120 million quid, so that anybody that Britain doesn't want in country gets shipped out to his country, and hey presto, they have created a new development, which is to create a dumping ground in Africa, the place which can least afford it for the people who most need help. And here's the kicker. This is why this post and many of my posts have a circular kind of impact and bear listening to by absolutely everybody. They couldn't have done that without the compliance of an African head of state. Do you get my point? So what it says is that the reason Africans aren't here to validate and back up and support a narrative which is often hugely redacted, hugely tailored to present a savior image of Europe, to present a supremacist image of Europe. Africans aren't here to back that up, but at the same time, Africans have a responsibility to themselves and to their people to live in their truth and to become awakened to their purpose on this planet. Now, I'm not saying it's not happening yet, but I'm just saying that I need to underscore this fact that when we all talk about this great awakening, the awakening isn't some kind of woo, 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 woo thing that's going on and all kumbaya and let's withdraw to our caves and meditate on the condition of our navels and think all peace, love, and light and so on and so forth. The awakening manifests in the behaviors that we take and the behaviors that we make incumbent on our politicians to take, and the way in which sometimes we oppose the actions that our politicians take. That is what shows whether or not we are actually awakened or becoming awakened. So, an awakened person, as I'm learning, and it's been a hard ride. That's why I'm tired a lot of the time, because there's so much going on. I'm learning so much from so many sources, none of whom I would have expected. Half of the stuff I'm learning from people who are like half my age. They call me uncle, but I listen to them carefully, and I see the insights and the nuggets that they're sharing with me, and particularly when they are really useful. An awakened person doesn't have time for racism. If you're nervous about people of other races or ethnicities, because, sorry, I forget, we're all actually only one race, that's genus Homo sapiens. If you're worried about people of other races, think again, go back and check yourself. 2, if you're acting in your fear, which, hey, look, it's this, where we are now is not easy. People's livelihoods are at risk. People's health is at risk. People's liberties are at risk. So fear is the natural go-to response for people. But the more awakened you become, the more you realize that that is your lesser self and that you as a human being have got way more to offer. And finally, in the end, there have to be ethics. And I reckon when a person connects with their source, with their actual origin, with the creator source, which manifests inside of themselves, hypocrisy is one of the first things to go. You realize that you can't have one rule for people who look like him and another rule for people who look like him, or one rule for people whose gender is this and another rule for people whose gender is this. In short, you are talking about respecting people's lives. So, we need to cut absolutely to the chase. The Black people, the people of African origin, etc., who are in Europe, aren't here to prove to people of European origin how superior they are. They're here to become awakened to who they are and to rock their role as human beings in society. And surprise, 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 exactly the same task remains for those of European origin. Guys, we're all in the same boat. And if we decide to paddle together, we survive together. And the regressives that want to enslave you and I get to lose. Thank you so much for listening to this. And do take a look at the rest of my posts.